Hi YouTube, how are you doing today? I don't know if you watched the Hearthstone World Championship this weekend. It was very interesting. A lot of great games. Yanming took the whole thing in the end. So our new world champion is Yanming. And in today's video, I'm going to have a look at his world's winning lineup because I feel like he made some interesting choices. He went for some off-meta decks, and I think some of them might be getting more popular on ladder the next few days. So maybe it's not a bad idea to have a look at these decks. Maybe if you're interested in trying them as well, it would be a good time to do it now. But also, if you want to just be prepared and know what people are playing when you suddenly see a warrior or an unknown warlock, for example, these are the decks played at Worlds by Yanming. So here you see the whole lineup: Discover Hunter, Cycler Rogue, Armor Warlock, and Control Warrior. So especially the two last decks, the Warlock and the Warrior, are not meta right now. But since yesterday, since Yanming won Worlds, when I played on ladder, I have actually faced more and more, especially of the Armor Warlock. So I'd say we have a look at these decks, talk a little bit about how they work, and potentially what you can play to beat them as well. Because like if you don't want to be playing mirrors, you may want to know what you can play instead to try and target these decks a little bit. So let's go open the client and have a look. So here we have the first deck was Discover Hunter. Now, obviously, this one was already a thing before Worlds. This Discover Hunter has been quite popular. The only thing that we need to maybe look out for is that, especially the Chinese players, the China server, they really like putting ETCs in their decks. And not all Discover Hunters play that. So I think we should have a look at that first. So we have an Armor Vendor, a Fizzle, and a Brute. So keep in mind that with the Fizzle, there is a chance you can go infinite with this Discover Hunter, because we play the scouts. After you discover a card, get a copy of it. So if you have this on the board and you play ETC, you're discovering one of your ETC cards. And if you discover Fizzle, it means you will have two Fizzles in your hands. And that means when you play the Fizzle, there will be a Fizzle in your envelope. So if you make sure you have enough hand space, you can keep opening envelopes with Fizzles in them, and then like time it properly, you can go infinite. And that's something we've seen Yanming do throughout Worlds, is also with the Warrior. He has been going infinite a couple of times, or attempting to go infinite. It didn't always work out, I have to say that, because it can be a bit tricky with hand size and all these things. And the Discover Hunter, actually, you can play this in a couple different ways, right? You can go for the big tempo, playing your 2/5 tones early. There's also an Incendious in this deck. I don't think all Discover Hunters run that. But there's also a game plan where you go really long and you try to just go infinite, especially if you go against like board-based matchups. In some cases, you can go ceaseless expanse and then put that in your Fizzle envelope, and then just have these ceaseless expanses forever throughout the late game, which is what we kind of saw Yanming do in the very last series against Fury Hunter. It was already 2-2. It was Discover Hunter against Dungar Druid, and the Hunter took it eventually in the end after a really long series of fizzling and ceaseless expanse. So there are different ways to play this deck, but it's a very fun hunter deck. It's very different from old school face hunters that we used to be playing. So if you like a bit more value, maybe you can actually try this hunter. I will leave all the deck codes in the comments or in the description. So if you want to try something, just grab the code. Then the next deck that Yanming was playing is Cycler Rogue. Again, this deck has been on ladder. It has been quite popular, especially in the higher ranks in Legend. I don't know about other ranks on the way to Legend if you see it as much, because it is quite a complicated deck to play. There are a lot of things you need to be thinking of. There's a lot of different game plans as well that you need to identify. So in some matchups, it's enough to just cycle a lot through your deck and get the giants out. Together with breakdance, for example, you can make a really wide board of 8/8s, and some decks just already cannot deal with that on their own. Then another game plan you can go for a bit later in the game is a Sonya a game plan with Insidious, where you just discount the Insidious, you Shadow Step it, you play it a bunch of times basically. So um, you shuffle a lot of eruptions in your deck, and then you draw through your whole deck with the spell damage of the Oracle. And that can sometimes just give you an OTK or a full board clear if it's not a full OTK. And then again, it's quite difficult for some decks to deal with that. And then, of course, there is another way of just going for a lot of Griftas and trying to get the deal 6 damage spell, for example, or the steal your opponent's minion for a turn. There's a lot of good spells that you can discover from Grifta. If you go Sonya with the 1 mana Scoundrel, for example, and then you go Grifta, you get an extra copy of Grifta. You also get an extra copy of the 1 mana spell when you play it with Sonya, because it's also a 1-cost card. So there's actually a lot of ways that you can win with this deck, but like I said, it's not the easiest deck. It can be quite tricky identifying what exactly you need to do in your specific matchup. But it is quite popular on ladder, and you might see it a little bit more now after so many players brought the Cycle Rogue at Worlds, and Yanming winning with it as well. Okay, the third deck is the Armor Warlock. Now, this deck, actually, we never saw it on ladder before Worlds. And I don't know if Chinese players on the Chinese server were already playing it, or if this is something they actually just came up with for Worlds. But it seems to be a pretty solid deck, and I've been seeing it on ladder since Worlds. I've seen different variations of it as well. So some cards were swapped. Some decks are going even more all in on the Starship stuff with the spell that gives all your cards reborn. This one, Eternal Layover. I saw that yesterday on ladder. So you just give everything reborn, you destroy the minions, and then you get more Starship pieces basically. So what this deck does is it's very good at stalling. So there is a lot of freezes. Soul Freeze. There is Slippery Slope as well. There is Glacial Shard as well, 2 copies. So you can freeze minions, you can freeze opponents' faces, try and stall the game a little bit, because in the late game, the mid to late game is where you're going to be able to gain a lot of armor. Especially when you have the Brittlebone Buccaneer together with your Starship piece. And then there's more that you can do with this. You can, for example, play the Kraken on the Starship piece, get even more armor, because it destroys your Starship piece, and then when the Kraken dies, it resummons the Starship piece. So you just keep adding this armor, because the death rattle of this one is gain 6 armor. So you're just gonna keep getting this armor, and then you have your Starship, like after it dies, you can just launch your Starship again with the Exodar, and then gain copies. It's usually the best way. Just get copies of the Starship pieces that cost 1, so you can just build it again after that. And then when you launch the Starship, another thing you can do is you can reverb it, so you get even more armor. And then in the late game, the very late game, after you've gained so much armor already, you can go, for example, Wheel of Death if you're in a very long matchup where you need some other way to win. There's also a domino effect in here. So if you play against board-based decks, all you kind of need to do is control the board long enough, and then Sardras into taunts basically wins you the game most of the times as well. If you need to go longer, there is a Kill Jade in here as well. And again, the Fizzle, that seems to be in most of the Yanming's decks. So if you need more value, if you want even more Starship pieces, for example, or more copies of the Exodar to keep going and going, or Ceaseless Expanses, that's also an option to go for. Personally, I tried the deck on ladder yesterday. It took me a few attempts to really see how it worked exactly, like how to time your freezes, how much damage you can take before you have to start freezing. Because if you go in on your freezes too early, you're gonna run out in the mid game, and then you can still take enough damage to still die. There are a couple of bad or worse matchups, especially it's not very popular right now, but Reno, like it will just remove your whole starship piece before you launch it, so that can be a problem. Also, I faced some weapon rogues. They play deafen, so they will silence your taunts, and then you don't get the armor. Also, Shaman has the 1 mana spell Thrall's Gift, and it can hex your minions, so keep that in mind as well. Especially if you go like uh, Buccaneer into the defense crystal, give it reborn. You're really happy you have a sticky taunt, but it can get hexed, and then you don't have the starship piece. So these are some things you need to keep in mind. But other than that, I had a lot of fun gaining a lot of armor. I saw some games on ladder yesterday where my opponents gained over 200 or 300 armor with this deck. So it can make the games go really, really long. So if you enjoy that, this is a deck for you. And then the final deck of World's winning lineup is Control Warrior. This is also a deck that hasn't really been played yet. Most of the control warriors these days on ladder at least play Odin, right? So they have like some kind of win con with that. But this control warrior basically wins by going infinite with Fizzle and Zola if you need very long games. Again, this will not always be needed. If you are against board-based matches, basically you just try and control the board a little bit, gain enough armor, and just make sure that they cannot kill you. But in some longer controlier games, you might need to go Fizzle and Zola. I saw Yanming mess this up once because it can be a bit tricky. You need to really pay attention to your hand size as well, so that when you open the envelope, you need to make sure the Fizzle will be there, or else you cannot keep going infinite. And then basically what you can do in your infinite envelope is either have like a ceaseless expanse in there to clear the board, or extra armor, like safety goggles, for example, be really good. New Heights, we saw Yanming do this with the infinite Fizzle and New Heights, actually reaching 59 mana in one game. So that's actually really, really insane. But there's a lot of like funny things that you can do with this deck in standard Hearthstone that you would expect to see only in Wild. So if you like really, really long control-y games, this is something you need to go for. Is the Fizzle Zola combo. I hope you enjoyed this little breakdown of the world's decks, the world's lineup. And let me know which one of these 4 decks you are looking forward to trying, or if you have been seeing any of them on ladder, which one was it? Personally, I'm going to give the Warlock another try. Maybe I'll make a separate video about that once I master the deck a little bit better, because right now I'm still learning it. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Bye!